Welcome along. Good morning, wherever you are in the world. It may be evening, it's morning here. Welcome along to this latest edition of the Success Mindset series. For those of you who haven't been with us before, this is a series of talks where we look at ways of helping people develop a positive mindset, overcoming any limiting beliefs, any negative patterns that may have held them back, develop a positive mindset, a high performance mindset, and also start to develop some of the skills and tools that you need to help you succeed as a new executive. Because many of just about all of the programs that we run, whether they're positive or negative, are things that we have learned over time as we've progressed in life. So successful executives will run positive programs. If you're struggling, if you have imposter syndrome, if you have anxiety, if you fear of failure, it's because somewhere along the line in your life, that had become a mental pattern programmed into your unconscious or subconscious mind. And what we do in this series is we help people develop the capabilities and the mindset to overcome any negative patterns, any limiting beliefs, and develop positive mindsets and access to skills and tools to really help them succeed in life and in their career. Today's session is slightly different from the previous ones. We're looking at a framework I've developed called the ASDIC Framework to help give your team what I call the unconscious edge. How do we help people get the right mindset to achieve their full potential? Who am I to be talking about this? What have I done? I've spent most of my career in the corporate world. I was a partner and senior executive at Accenture, where I was also responsible for running a number of global legal and commercial teams, and was part of the faculty at the Centre of Negotiation Excellence, as well as holding executive and operating committee posts in the UK. So in that time, I got very used to developing and growing teams. After I left that, I ran my own negotiations consultancy for a couple of years, and then joined Hewlett-Packard and various of its spin-offs as a commercial director. During all that time, I developed a deep interest in what makes people tick, what makes people function the way they do. So when I left Hewlett-Packard, or DXC Technologies it was at the time, I retrained as a clinical hypnotherapist and NLP, neuro-linguistic programming practitioner. And as people came to see me, some came in my, if you like, my therapeutic capacity, normally because they had anxiety, they had a fear of failure, they had imposter syndrome, and others came just for coaching. I'd done quite a lot as an executive and said, how could people would come to me saying, how can I develop the skills and the capabilities to achieve what I want to achieve? And it quickly became clear to me that while a lot of organizations look at mental well-being and corporate performance or executive performance as completely different things, often managed by different teams within the organization, they're actually two sides of the same coin. And with my corporate background and my therapeutic background, I was uniquely placed to bring those two together into a comprehensive program to really help executives thrive. And so that's what I've done here in the ASDIC framework that we'll talk about in a second. But one of the keys to understanding it, one of the threads that runs through it all, is understanding how your mind works. Because I think, as most people know, you have a conscious mind, which is your day-to-day thinking mind, which really only controls about 5% of what you do every day. The other part, the unconscious or subconscious part, controls everything else. It controls how you walk, how you talk. It runs all the patterns that basically drive the way you behave in certain situations. So your unconscious mind is really the dominant part of your mind. And it's actually quite difficult to change something once it's in your unconscious mind. But before we get to how you change it, let's look at how do things get put into your unconscious mind in the first place. Because no one's born with imposter syndrome. No one's born with fear of failure. No one's born with a success mindset. They're all things that we have learned or accumulated along life's journey, even if we're not sure what caused them. And there are three ways things can come into your unconscious mind. First is you experience them. And this is particularly common in things like phobias, where if you've experienced being bitten by a dog, you may well start running a subconscious pattern that says, I avoid dogs because it hurts when they bite. You may experience them secondhand. For example, again, looking at phobias, if you have a parent who sees a spider and jumps onto a chair and screams, it's a spider, your unconscious mind will think, oh, spiders are dangerous. I better put in a subconscious pattern that makes me afraid of and avoid spiders. The second way things can come into your unconscious mind and become embedded there are through suggestions from people in authority, often while you're either under 7 years old or in a state of some emotion. And for a lot of the people I've worked with, this has been in the form of usually a teacher, but it can be a parent or a caregiver or someone from the church telling them they weren't good enough. And how many of you have experienced a teacher that said, oh, you're stupid, or you'll never amount to anything, or you should expect to be working in McDonald's for the rest of your life? If you're in a state of emotion, which you normally are when you're being told off by a teacher, that can bypass your conscious mind and your critical faculty and become a subconscious pattern, a subconscious belief about yourself that you're not good enough. And your unconscious mind, which as its primary function tries to keep you safe, then tries to stop putting you in positions where you might be seen to be stupid. The third way which can come in is repetition. If you keep doing something over and over again, it becomes a habit. A very obvious example of this is driving. When you first start driving, you probably get in the car, you think, start the engine, touch the accelerator, put in the clutch, put the gear stick in gear, slowly lift the clutch while I put on a bit of gas. And every part of driving you think about, but then you repeat it day in, day out, and suddenly it becomes a habit. It becomes almost a subconscious pattern, so you can do it without thinking about it. In fact, I suspect many of you who drive can now probably get in your car at one point, get out of it the other end, and not really remember anything at all about what you did in the journey along the way, because your unconscious mind has just run the pattern of, this is how I drive a car. Well, for the most part, that is a really good thing. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to walk without learning every day. You wouldn't be able to talk without relearning every day. But it can also be a bad thing. For example, smoking is an obvious example. Most people, when they started smoking, they coughed and spluttered, they had a sore throat, but they stuck at it. And eventually their unconscious mind thought, oh, they do this every day. I will just accept it's part of who they are, part of what they do. And suddenly smoking becomes a habit. It's not something you do consciously. It's just a habit. Or we can have a separate discussion about whether it's a habit or an addiction. I would say it's a habit, but that's not for the purpose of this. But once we understand how our mind works, that once something has gone into our unconscious mind, it is very difficult to shift it, because your conscious mind and your critical faculty that sits between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind tends to resist it. So one of the things we have to do is say, how do we get past that critical faculty and start to make changes in the unconscious mind? And that's what we look at, some of the techniques, particularly in the early stages of the ASDIC framework. Now, in a second, I'll talk about this framework. I called it ASDIC because, as many of you may know, ASDIC was the precursor to sonar that particularly the British Navy had installed in their ships and submarines during the Second World War, which allowed ships and the submarines to work out where they were, what was going on underwater, what was going on around them, so they could start to work out what was happening near them, and they could start to assess what might be threats, what might be positive opportunities, and what action should they take based on the results they got. So I thought it was quite useful as a name for this framework. But it starts by trying to change the way we think. As the quote from Einstein I have here, we can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So what is the ASDIC framework? It's a 5-phase framework. You'll see there for the framework to break you through limiting beliefs and negative patterns. The 5 elements are acceptance, stabilization, development, improvement, and consistency. And each phase combines hypnotherapy or visualization and NLP techniques with practical exercises and skills. Very briefly, acceptance is recognizing and accepting that there is an issue in your subconscious patterns. Stabilization is what I call resetting your mind to neutral, or the factory reset for the mind, as I call it. Development is starting to create new pathways, starting to focus on what you want. Improvement is building on that and building further skills to help your development. And consistency is just repeating these over time so they become embedded patterns in the same way that we talked about earlier. But particularly in consistency, we also focus on how do you build a bit of resilience so you're not thrown off course by the first ill wind, by the first difficult person or the first difficult conversation you have to have, because these can easily drive you back to the old behaviors. So look at these. Just a second. Acceptance. Now, this is very interesting. I was just studying this last week and did a quick check. And the recent Gartner survey said at least 50% of executives suffer from some sort of limiting belief, whether it's I'm not good enough, or fear of failure, fear of success even. And according to Korn Ferry's 2024 workforce analysis, 65% all executives and 71% of CEOs suffer from imposter syndrome. Now, I've spoken to and worked with a number of CEOs in my life, and many of them have confided in quieter moments that they're scared every day of being found out. That I even had one who said, I wonder when someone's just going to come up to me and say, you're just making this up, aren't you? So it's there. It's not widely spoken about because I run a lot of corporate training sessions on this thing using the framework. And before the sessions, I used to ask everyone, do you feel anything's holding you back? Do you have any limiting beliefs? The first question was usually, will my boss see my response to this? And the response was usually, no, I'm fine. I then started asking it in the meetings, and everybody there said they were absolutely fine. They had no limiting beliefs. They were all ready to go. I then found that after the session, once we had explored all the limiting beliefs that can exist, we did some visualization work anyway, just to clear them. Up to 40% of all the people that were on these courses contacted me after the session and said, I didn't want to say it at the time in case my boss thought I was weak or in case my boss thought I wasn't performing, but I have got a problem and I wish you could help me with it. So the issues do exist. These figures show it. They're also not spoken about as much as they should be because people are scared that they will be seen as not being good enough, as being weak, or having something wrong with them if they confess to it. So the first thing is to accept that there is an issue or that there's a problem, that the problem is with you, but also to realize that it's not your fault. That goes back to the way patterns are installed earlier. And the relief people can feel when they realize this is a pattern they run. It's not something that's wrong with them. It's something that they do. The relief is palpable and tangible and really sets them up for, well, if it's something that I do, can we change what I do? And the answer to that is absolutely. So acceptance means acknowledging, then accepting that the problem is with you, that it's beliefs, thoughts, and feelings that are inside of you that are causing you to struggle, but that it's not your fault and that you can do something about it. And that's the A for ASDIC, the acceptance. Second element or second phase is stabilization. I love this quote. When we're no longer able to change a situation, we're challenged to change ourselves. And this is where it starts. As I said earlier, I think I call it the restore factory settings phase, where we start to delete or reframe all the problematic programs. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to do this by willpower alone, as anyone who's tried to overcome imposter syndrome or any of those limiting beliefs or patterns, you think you'll be able to do it, but you go into a different setting, perhaps go into a different team, a different company, and you find, although you've made all these mental promises to yourself that you'll be different, you find the patterns keep repeating. Again, it's not your fault. It's you are running an unconscious pattern that it's difficult, if not impossible, to change by willpower alone. If you don't want to go down a technique like hypnotherapy or NLP, you can fake it till you make it, which can work. But again, that's overcoming or installing a new pattern by repetition. So call it fake it till you make it, but the repetition starts to embed the new pattern. So for example, if you start dressing differently, acting differently, talking differently, and do that every day and consistently, then that habit will most oftentimes stick. But you have to do it all the time. And you have to be resilient because at times you will be quaking inside and wanting to go back to the way you were before. Certainly, I had a friend, a colleague, still a very good friend, who decided to do it this way. He wanted to become a partner in a firm we worked at. And almost overnight, he started changing the way he dressed. He started changing the way he looked. He started changing the way he acted. He started changing the way he spoke to people. And it worked. He became a very successful and very respected partner. But for a while, we all thought, what's going on with this guy? He's changed overnight. He's become someone we don't know. But you may call it faking it till you make it. You may call it embedding a pattern through repetition, but it worked. If you want to do it much quicker, hypnotherapy and NLP can quickly and effectively help overcome these. And in our individual and in the group training sessions, we give people the option to use hypnotherapy and NLP. We will not force it on anyone. I realize people may have different beliefs or understandings about hypnotherapy, but we can do a lighter version as a visualization. But very often we will run hypnotherapy and NLP sessions with the groups or with individuals in the group to help them really quickly overcome these limiting patterns and beliefs. At times, I'll be honest, we do a bit of almost like a hypnosis comedy show, but with a business message. For example, if we make someone forget their name, and then, but the message will be, if we can use hypnotherapy to make someone forget their name, albeit only for a short time, which their name is a core part of them. So if we can make someone forget that, we can quickly make them forget that they had a limiting belief. We can very quickly make them forget that they had imposter syndrome. And instead of bringing it back, like we bring their name back, we anchor that as the new way of being. Another thing I like doing is I'll stick someone's hand to their head using hypnotherapy, and we'll have a laugh about offering them money to get their hand unstuck to their head, but they can't unstick their hand. And then we go to people, we say, the audience, we say, is his hand really stuck? And everyone will say, no, it's not. And say, well, what's causing it to stick? And they'll say, it's just negative thoughts. It's just the way that he thinks about it. They'll say, exactly. And how many of you today feel you're stuck in a situation and it's actually just down to your thoughts? So I use hypnotherapy and NLP in group sessions and in individual sessions. And that's really the core part of stabilization. It's the quickest and effective way of overcoming those limiting beliefs, those limiting patterns, the imposter syndrome, whatever it is. The next phase is development. And in this, we focus particularly on goal setting. If you don't know where you're going, you don't know what direction to head in. You also don't know when you've got there. And goal setting is actually proven to be very effective in helping you move towards these, because I didn't mention it at the beginning, although I meant to. Your unconscious mind loves tracking patterns. It loves things to track. So if you have goals written down and you read them every day, your mind will, first of all, the repetition start to drive them in that direction. But because it's got a pattern to track, it will start following that pattern. An interesting experiment we do, and you can try it at home, like try it with your friends, is we'll ask someone to come up on stage and just to move their eyes in a smooth circle. And you'll find they can't. It goes jerky movements, it doesn't go circular. Then ask them to move their eyes side to side in a straight line. And again, it's very difficult to do it smoothly. But then if you hold up a finger and say, now track my finger in a circle, or track my finger side to side, their eyes move smoothly and easily because it's got something to track. So goals are really important to have. They're a really useful tool in getting to the success you want and where you want, because you know where you're going. You've got a pattern to follow, and you can write them down and read them every 48 hours or so. It just takes 5 minutes. You can record them in an audio file and listen to it in the car, wherever you want. Or you can visualize it. A lot of people use vision boards. I work with an entrepreneur who basically says vision boards made his life. He had pictures on his mirrors in his bathroom, he had pictures on the walls in his study of the things that he wanted to achieve. And he said seeing these every day really drove him towards them. So we'll do a lot of work around goal setting in a number of dimensions, both personal and professional. We'll talk about, you'll have heard of SMART goals, that they should be specific, measurable, achievable, but challenging, relevant, and I'd also say congruent with your beliefs and values, otherwise they won't work, and time-bound. So you have these framework, you will have heard of SMART goals, I've no doubt about it. But I would also say SMART goals is more of a work-related think all the principles are the same in your personal goals. A lot of people don't follow their work goals because they're not their personal goals. They're things that are imposed on them. So they stick them in a drawer and never look at them again. I encourage people more to look at what are their personal goals, which may overlap with their work goals. But again, same thing, it should be specific, measurable, achievable. I would say congruent rather than relevant, and time-bound. And what makes goals effective? You see these characteristics. I've got 3 of them here, which is very interesting because I've actually 3 of the characteristics are the most positive hypnotic suggestions. So it should be expressed in the positive, what you want to be, not what you don't want to be. The example I give here, I'm confident speaking in front of a room full of people, not I'm not scared of it. So you express it in the positive. Secondly, express it in the present tense, as if you've already got it. So I earn £250,000 a year, whatever it is. I am an accomplished public speaker, whatever it is. Not I want to be, but I am. And thirdly, in the first person. So it should start with the word I, followed by a verb. I am, I speak, I do. Because these 3 characteristics, positive, present tense, and personal, really bring the goals into focus and make them much more effective. Next phase after development is improvement. And here we start to build much more around skills and tools to help people foster the success for executive teams. And we start, first section we look at is really in relationships. And as I said, I've run a number of courses, and I always say, what are the 3 characteristics of a good relationship? I get a number of answers, but the 3 that were almost constantly in every group are rapport, trust, and communication. So in this phase, we start to build on rapport. How can you build rapport quickly with someone that you don't know? You may not particularly like them, you may not get on with them, but you have to form a business relationship with them quickly. And here NLP can provide tools, skills that are really useful in helping you build rapport quickly. Or as it says here, build rapport quickly. One main ones we use, I think it's called mirroring and matching. You may have heard of this, where you mirror someone's movements and match them. It may start off with their movements, but then you can quickly get deeper. And if you start to mirror and match their breathing patterns, the way they speak, and even their eye blinks, you very quickly build rapport, because to their unconscious mind, they're almost seeing themselves in the mirror. And there is no one we trust more in the world than themselves. Another NLP technique you can use here is called eye accessing, which gives you an insight into what rep system a person is dominant in. We all think in representation systems: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and to an extent gustatory and olfactory, but nearly all VAK, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And while it may change from time to time, most of us will have a dominant rep system. And if you talk to someone in their dominant, using language that reflects their dominant rep system, you will again much more quickly build a connection with them. So for example, if someone was dominant in the visual rep system and you said, do you see my point? Can we look at the big picture? They will get it quickly. If, however, someone's dominant in the visual rep system and you use kinesthetic references, you could be at cross purposes. So if someone's dominant visually and you keep saying, have you got a grasp of that? Does it ring a bell? So using a kinesthetic or an auditory reference and their visual, you will not build a rapport so quickly. You'll be talking at cross purposes. And look at how you can tell what rep system someone is dominant in very quickly by the way they move their eyes and the language they use. We look at trust, the trust equation from a book called The Trusted Advisor by David Maister, a great book which says trust is credibility plus reliability plus intimacy divided by self-orientation. So it's credibility is it's your references, it's what have you done in the past that is credible, that I can rely on. Reliability is, do you do what you say you'll do when you say you'll do it? And intimacy is, it's not personal intimacy, obviously, but it's how well you know the person and understand their problems, understand their thinking. So that, the top half of the equation is credibility. Are you credible in what you do? Reliability. Are you reliable? And intimacy. How well do you know the person? But all that is divided by self-orientation. Self-orientation is where you're looking after only your interests. And when a person spots that, it drives trust through the floor. So if you, I used to say, you score each of these out of 10, and you can both see how much you trust another person. But with a bit of self-reflection, you can also see how much you think they trust you, and then set about how do you build that trust up. Usually the quickest way is by reducing your self-orientation score and really thinking about their problem. Credibility is usually set fairly early on because they will look at, for example, reviews, past performances, references, etc. Reliability, you start to build from day one by turning up on time and doing what you say you'll do. And intimacy grows over a longer period, provided you're showing that you really understand the person, you get to know them deeper and deeper. So trust equation, very important in being a signpost and a good guide as to how trustworthy you're behaving and how much you trust the other person. In this improvement stage, we also look at communication. Obviously, it's a big topic in its own, but we particularly focus on active listening because most people do not listen well. When someone else starts talking, you find your mind wanders either off to something completely different, like it's nearly lunchtime, I wonder what will be in the sandwiches, or you start to think how you're going to respond to it. So while the person is still talking, you're already thinking how you're going to respond to the first point they made. And it may be you're listening just for the purpose of telling them that they're wrong. So we do a lot of exercises and develop skills on how do you listen actively and completely so you can understand a person and show them that you've understood them, even if you don't accept or agree with what they're saying. And we also talk about speaking for a purpose and to minimize resistance. How can you use permissive language so you're using language which minimizes resistance? You're not encouraging conversations by using things like, you can't do this, we must do this. You're using language that allows the conversation to flow for you. Imagine this situation, imagine with me that, but what if? There are a number of words and phrases that you can use, a number of ways of structuring words that minimize resistance and therefore keeps the relationship moving forward. Finally, if my PC will move, we can come on to consistency. And it's starting to use the skills and techniques in the real world and not letting bumps in the road throw you off. And this is really where you start to embed these through repetition. So they become to make these skills, these techniques, this mindset part of who you are, simply by repeating it and making it part of your subconscious personality. So in this section, as well as continuing to just use the skills we've already got, we start to say, how can you build resilience? How can you develop techniques to deal with difficult people and difficult topics that could otherwise throw you off course? So, for example, the most common things are for people either get angry or emotional with you, or they take or dig in a position that is contrary to yours, or use threats against you. In any of these, it would be very easy to go back to the way you behaved before. So we develop techniques. Some of them we've looked at already during the communication session. You have to be able to deal with these, stay balanced, keep emotionally control, and not let our own emotions hijack us. We start in this section to touch on basic collaborative negotiation skills, because these are very useful in dealing with difficult people or difficult situations. We look at interests. A person may be digging in on their position when what you really want to know is, what are their interests? Not what are they asking for, but why are they asking for it? I use an example which you may have heard of, the story of the orange in this. And the way I say it is, I tell it as, imagine it's a Sunday afternoon. I'm sitting watching the football and I hear screaming from the kitchen, and my two boys are in there fighting over the last orange. They're both holding on to it. They're both saying, give me that orange. I need that orange. So I take out a big knife from the knife rack. And what do? Most people will say, you cut the orange down the middle and give them half each. So I do that, and it looks like a neat solution. But then my older son takes the knife, takes the peel off the orange, drops the peel in the bin, and eats the fruit because he's hungry and thirsty. But my younger son then takes the knife, takes the peel off the fruit, puts the fruit in the bin, and takes the peel over to where he's baking muffins for a school bake sale. So suddenly my clever solution doesn't seem quite so clever, because there's half an orange in the bin. Because I looked at their position, I want that orange rather than their interests. Their interest being, on one hand, I'm hungry and thirsty and I need to satisfy that. And on the other hand, I want to make cakes for the school bake sale and I need orange rind for that. And the more you can dig into someone's interests rather than their position, the more you find scope for common ground and scope for solutions that don't involve anyone backing down and losing. Interest also allows you to have a greater scope, the number of options that you can have to satisfy their interests. It also lets you understand what alternatives there are to people achieving their interests that may involve you not doing something with you, but going elsewhere, as you can too. Helps you decide, is the outcome fair? And also say, is it my commitment at the end of this? Something that's that I can certainly live with, I can do, is both capable of doing it and it is capable of being implemented. I can then often do a bonus session on negotiation anyway. And sometimes I'm asked back to do completely separate sessions on negotiations, because in my previous life, I did run a negotiation consultancy where we did a lot of training in collaborative negotiation based on the work of the Harvard Negotiation Project and the book Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and Bill Urey, which I'd recommend to anyone. So that is the ASDIC framework. I've used it at an individual level. I also use it with teams, corporate teams, usually of executives, often very new executives who may have deep functional skills, but not quite the mindset or the skills required to perform at an executive level. The results have been very pleasing from my perspective, and I'm regularly invited back to to go deeper or to teach the next intake of executives or a different set of executives. If you'd like to have a chat about what we could do for you, you'll see, just follow the link here, or just give me a call or drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you. I'll also intersperse throughout the day tips for dealing with anxiety, because anxiety is a constant companion. People find different ways for dealing with it. So I give a variety of ways you can deal with it. Most people find one that resonates with them. But that's what we've done. A second will switch off the recording, and any questions, please get in touch. And if you'd like to have a chat about what we could do for you, either follow the link, give me a call, drop me an email. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks very much. Hopefully see you soon. Cheers.